Alright, we are here today with the first video in our intermediate series, and this video is going to be focusing on talking about a domain controller in Windows Server 2008 R2. I'm not going to show you how to install the actual ISO image because I already showed that in the intro series with the Windows 7 ISO, and it's the exact same process except it's just a different ISO and you get a different screen when you first turn on your computer. And when you first turn on that computer, the first thing that you'll see is this right here, the initial configuration tasks. And I'm going to say do not show this at login again because everything that's here I'm going to be configuring later on. So I'm just going to say close, but if you wanted to, you could say leave this so that you're aware of all these things later on. And actually I'll just leave this so that we can talk about it later in the other videos. So we're just going to close that out, and right here our server manager opens. So our server manager outlines a few different things about our server. As you can see here, we have our name, our work group, our local area connection information, whether or not remote desktop is enabled, our product ID, firewall updates, our enhanced security configuration settings, just a bunch of different stuff. So the first thing we're going to be doing is talking about the Active Directory domain controller. So if we're going to come to our roles here, we can say add roles, and you can say skip this page by default if you want to, or you can just go next. And here we have all of our server roles. So there's a bunch of different things we can install here, but I'm talking about Active Directory domain services. But we're not going to install that right now. There is another way. If you're installing an Active Directory domain controller, do not go to your server manager. So we're going to close that, and we'll just minimize this for now, and we're going to hit our start button. Similar to Windows 7, we have our search bar, and I'm going to type in dcpromo, so dcpromo, and this little box comes up right here, dcpromo. So it's checking if Active Directory is installed and the binaries, and it's going to be loading. It's going to be taking a few minutes, and in the meantime I'm going to go to the network and sharing center, because if you're installing any server, it has to have a static IP address. So we're going to go to our change adapter settings, and we are going to say right click, properties, TCP IP version 4, and right now it's getting its address through DHCP, so we have a command prompt pinned here, and I'll say ipconfig. So right now I'm sitting on a 192.168.238.133 network, but this is actually different from my host computer. So my host computer is using a different subnet, which means my virtual machine player settings aren't how I desire them to be. So I'm going to go to network adapter settings, and right now it's going to be using NAT, but I want to be using bridged. So I'm going to hit OK. That takes a few seconds, and we could do ipconfig. Okay, our domain controller is ready to be installed here, but we need our static IP address first. So I'm going to say ipconfig again, and now we can see we're in the right subnet. We are the 192.168.1.118, but that's still dynamic. So I want to set it statically. It'll be 192. Numlock's on, or rather not on. 192.168.1, and I'm going to say .20 because I don't think that address is being used in my network right now. And 192.168.1.1. Preferred DNS, we're going to be using our default gateway for that. And close. So I'll minimize the network and sharing center, and we're here back with our Active Directory domain services. So we'll hit next, and it's going to be giving us this information here. Windows Server 2008 and 2008 R2 domain controllers have new security defaults for accounts named, allow cryptography algorithms. It goes on and on. There's a lot of stuff here, but the answer is next. And we are going to create a new domain in a new forest. If you don't necessarily understand what a domain is or what a forest is, it's not that big of a deal. You don't have to quickly understand them, but I have this page open here on TechNet. So it says here, I'll explain forest first. A forest is a complete instance of Active Directory. Each forest acts as a top-level container in that it houses all domain controllers for that particular AD instance. A forest can contain one or more container objects, all of which share common logical structure, global catalog, directory schema, and directory configuration, as well as automatic two-way transitive trust relationships. The first domain in the forest is called the forest root domain. The name of that domain refers to the forest, such as nwtraders.msft. By default, information in Active Directory is shared only within the forest. In this way, the forest is a security boundary for the information that is contained in that instance of Active Directory. So our forest is our sort of top level, and our domain is a container object. So it's a collection of administratively defined objects that are shared across a common directory database, security policies, and trust relationships within other domains. In this way, each domain is an administrative boundary for that object. A single domain can span multiple physical locations, sites, and can contain millions of objects. So that's a very sort of broad explanation, and if you've never installed Active Directory before, then you probably still have no clue what I'm talking about, but you'll start to understand a little bit more when we actually install it and show you how it works. So new forest and a new domain, and this error comes up. The administrator account becomes the domain administrator account when you create the new domain. The new domain cannot be created with the local administrator account with a password that does not meet the requirements. So I discussed previously passwords having to meet requirements, I believe, in the very first video. And now we're facing that problem here where I do not have a password, therefore the password's not meeting the requirement. So I'm going to go to manage my computer, and as you can see, it actually brings up our server manager window instead of the computer management window like it did in Windows 7. So under configuration, we have our local users and groups, and we have our users. So on my user account, I'm going to assign it a password. Oh, pardon me. Right click, set password, proceed. Our new password doesn't matter too much for right now as long as it meets the requirements. So it has to have 3 different types of characters, and I'll also assign the local administrator account a password, since that is what it is talking about in this error box that we still have open on our screen. Okay, so now we have a password that meets requirements. So I'm going to say new forest, new domain. And now we have to type in our fully qualified domain name. So an example could be corp.contoso.com. For ours, I'm going to say it's cyber.defense.com. So it's checking if that forest name's already in use, verifying that BIOS. And the thing about installing an Active Directory is similar to installing any other image really, or any other actual operating system. It's going to take a while. So now we have our forest functional level. Details. Right now we have Server 2003 selected, so it says the Server 2003 forest functional level provides all features that are available in Windows 2000 forest functional level and the following features. So essentially what the forest functioning level is at which level do you want your domain to be operating at? So do you want it to be operating within the 2003 sort of I'll say era, if you want to call it that, or do you want it to be only operating on the sort of most recent standards and most recent technology? But I'm going to say that I want it to support all the way back to 2003. 2000 is outdated, nobody really uses it anymore, but there's still a lot of people using 2003, so I'll say yes, we're going to be able to support that. And we'll hit next. Oh, I don't think I hit it. Okay, examining DNS. Now, I believe at this point, if our DNS was not set statically, and if our IP address wasn't set statically, then we'd be getting errors. But it's been a while since I've done this, so don't quote me on that. So the first domain controller in the forest must be a global catalog server, and we recommend that you install the DNS server on the first domain controller. So you pretty much have to install DNS. There's no way around it. That's why we're doing it through the DC promo. So hit next, it's going to examine DNS. A delegation for this DNS server cannot be created because the parent zone does not run DNS server. So, do you want to continue? Yes. Hit next. And once again, this is asking a lot of information that you don't necessarily have to understand right now, because the focus here is cybersecurity and not necessarily the actual operating system configurations themselves. I want to talk about Active Directories since they're one of the most common features to be installed on a server. So we'll hit next after giving our password information there. And once again, this is probably going to take a while. Alright, so that took a few minutes, not too long, but now Active Directory Domain Service Installation Wizard is complete, so we'll hit finish. And our computer's going to have to restart now, so we'll be back when the computer's restarted. Alright, we're back. So the restart just finished, and it says the username and password is incorrect, which is okay because we changed the username, we changed the password in order to get the domain controller installed, because it said that we had an account that was going to become the domain administrator and the password didn't meet the complexity requirements. So auto login is turned on for that account, but now that we have an actual password, the credentials for our user, are different. And as you can see now, we have cyber, which is our net BIOS name, /user. So this means we are on the cyber domain right now, and we're using our account user to get into it. So I'll enter the password we used before that we assigned to it, and now that's going to open our account after it does all of this, preparing the desktop and such. So now it's going to take a few seconds, then we'll open it'll automatically open the windows and our server manager, and then I'll quickly show off sort of a few of the different options we have to work with now. So of course this opens this window, and I'm going to say forget about this right now, just close that out. And now we have our domain controller here. And as you see, our full computer name is now changed to win and then all that nonsense .cyber.defense.com. Our domain is cyber.defense.com. And if we come over to our roles, we can see that we have Active Directory Domain Services and a DNS server installed. So instead of having to install the two separate services and hook them up together, by using dcpromo, it's installed both of them for us. And things are already functioning as they should be. So if we want to go here, we could expand our Active Directory Domain Services. Let's just make this window bigger. We can see our Active Directory users and computers, our sites and services, and we can see all of our DNS configuration. So there's a lot of stuff here now. But I also just want to kind of point out here that in our administrative tools, we also have all these. So as you can see in this top left-hand corner, we have our Active Directory users and computers, which is also over here, right here. And Active Directory users and computers is going to be one of the bigger ones that we're going to use, because now we don't really have our local users and groups here anymore, as you see, because that's all been moved over to our Active Directory users and computers. If we expand that, we can see our users, our computers, our domain controllers, just all our stuff is here. So what this has sort of done for us is created these OUs, as they're called, these folders here, or the organizational units. So if we wanted to, we could right click, new, organizational unit, and we'd have all of that sort of information separated, and we'd have our users, our groups, everything of that sort. We could choose how we want to organize everything, but for right now this is what we're given by default. And this is what we're kind of going to get used to, because now instead of going to the configuration, we're going to be coming here to see all of our users, and all of these users are part of the domain, so other computers can use these users to log into our domain. But right now we currently have no other computers connected to our domain. Alright, now it's time to open your Windows 7 virtual machine and connect it over to the actual Server 2008 R2, so it's part of the domain. Might I remind you though, that if you do not go to your player settings, your removable devices, and your network adapter settings, and change it to bridged in case it is still on NAT, then this will not work. You have to have your IP address be on the exact same subnet as your local machine and your other virtual machine, which is our server 2008. So on our server 2008, we assigned an IP address of 192.168.1.20. So right now we can ping it, which is good. That means we can communicate with it. So if we couldn't communicate with it, then we wouldn't be able to connect. So now that we know everything's working, then we're going to go to our network and sharing center. We're going to go to our adapter settings, go to properties on this. We're going to select our IPv4 address when it loads up here. And we're going to go to use the following DNS server. So we're going to set our DNS server statically, and we're going to send our DNS server to the IP address of our domain controller. So we installed the DNS role on our domain controller. So we want to say I want to use this as my DNS server. The IP address of the domain controller, also known as your DNS server, is the DNS server for your workstation. So we've set that, and we're going to go computer, properties. Once again, things are taking a little long to load here because I have two virtual machines running, but we are going to scroll down, or pardon me, we are going to go to change settings right here, and we are going to, so it says rename this computer or change its domain / work group. So click change, and if we did not install either the professional or ultimate version of Windows 7, then this domain option would be grayed out. You can't connect a home basic or a home premium version of Windows to a domain. So now we're going to hit on domain. You remember before, our domain name when we were logging into our actual server was cyber. So when we actually logged in, it was cyber / user, as you remember before. And if you come back here to our server manager, our full computer name is cyber.defense.com. This first spot here, whatever this one is, or even if there's only one, you don't necessarily have to have two. That's your net BIOS name. And when you're using your your Windows 7 VM to connect to the domain, you're typing in the net BIOS name. And the reason we set the DNS server to be our Active Directory is because that's the only DNS server that is aware that this domain exists. No other DNS server would be able to find the fact that this is a domain on our local area network. So now it's asking for our credentials because it's been able to successfully identify the cyber domain. So we're going to use one of our domain administrators, and I'm going to be using user with a password which we assigned earlier. So this always takes a while, and once again it might be taking a little longer because I've lowered down the RAM on this machine. So welcome to the cyber domain. We hit OK, and it's going to say before you apply all these changes you're going to have to restart your PC. And it says right here again, just remind us. I'm going to say close, and it's going to say restart, so restart now. And upon restart, we'll see a similar screen to what we saw on our Server 2008 image the first time we created our domain. Alright, so now that we restart our computer, we see this screen here. Press Control Alt Delete to log in. So I'm going to hit Control Alt Delete, and because I'm using a VM, it also sends that command to my local PC, but I can hit cancel and just get back to this. So the other way to send a Control Alt Delete to your system is to press this little button up here, these little gray boxes. That'll send the Control Alt Delete as well. So right now what we're seeing is our computer name followed by / user. So if we were to log in right now, we'd be logging in to our local account. But that's not the case. We want to log into our domain. We just joined our domain. So we're going to say switch user, other user, and by default it's going to want to log us into our cyber domain, which you just joined. So we can type in our username and password right now, but I want to use a basic user account. So we're going to have to come over to our server, and we're going to have to come to Active Directory users and computers, and if we refresh, we see that our Windows 7 computer is in our domain now. We're actually seeing it, it's there. We could look at the properties, but right now I want to go to the users, and I'm going to say new, user. First name is going to be Joey. User logon name is going to be Joey at cyber.defense.com. We'll just assign a simple password. I typed that wrong. Okay, so we've created our user Joey, and now we're going to come back to our Windows 7 machine, log in with Joey using the credentials we just created. And it's preparing our desktop. So we created our user, and now we're able to use our Windows 7 machine to authenticate with that user. So the domain controller is controlling who can authenticate into the actual system so that they're gaining access to different resources or different security policies and things of that sort. So really the point of the Active Directory is managing anywhere from just a few computers to hundreds, if not thousands of computers, because in an organization or in a business, if you had 100 computers, it'd be much easier to have all those 100 computers on a domain than it would to have to go to each computer every time something went wrong. But of course, with a domain, you're going to be introducing a lot different sort of areas, I guess, of security. But what we're able to do with a domain is control the security with a lot more ease, I'd say, because you can use what are called group policy objects, and you can create a list of security principles and assign them to different computers or different users, and using them you can control pretty much absolutely everything the user has access to and how their computer will function. So they're a great security tool, and that's what we'll be discussing in later videos. But for now, I just kind of wanted to show off one of the more simple features with Server 2008. And now that we've authenticated with our domain and we have a PC joined to it, that will be the end of this video. So come back next video, we're going to be talking more about Server 2008, more of the roles in it, some of the differences, and some of the security features that come along with it.